Good evening, my beautiful listeners. Welcome back to the Forbidden Glass of Wine Sips and Secrets with me, Lady Divine, where we sip slowly and speak honestly. Tonight is not a loud episode. Tonight is not an episode for arguing in comment sections. Tonight is not an episode for finger pointing. Tonight is not an episode for moral performance. Tonight is an episode for listening. Because some truths, the ones that shape entire lives, are rarely shouted in daylight. They are whispered in fear, whispered in shame, whispered in confusion, whispered behind closed doors, whispered in therapy rooms, whispered in parked cars, whispered in bathrooms at family gatherings, and many times they are whispered in the dark. Tonight, we are talking about hidden lives, hidden fears, hidden struggles, and the emotional cost of living divided not to expose anyone, not to accuse anyone, not to embarrass anyone, but to understand something many communities still struggle to face. Silence has consequences, and when silence stretches across years, sometimes across decades, it begins to shape behavior in ways people never intended. So tonight, we are choosing understanding. This is not a courtroom conversation. This is a compassion conversation. So before we continue, take one slow breath with me. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your judgment pause. Because healing, real healing, never enters a locked emotional room. Tonight's pour is a deep red wine. Not light, not playful, not overly sweet. This is the kind of wine that asks something from you, the kind that makes you slow down, whether you plan to or not, the kind that stays on your tongue and refuses to be rushed. Because tonight's conversation requires maturity, not reaction, reflection, not reflex. This glass tonight is for courage, courage to listen, courage to learn, courage to admit what we may not fully understand yet. And my beautiful listeners, growth often begins right at the edge of discomfort. Sip slowly. Wine and wisdom. Wine teaches patience. If you rush it, it turns sharp. If you mishandle it, it turns bitter. If you store it poorly, it spoils before its time. Truth is the same. Truth rushed becomes violence. Truth weaponized becomes cruelty. Truth forced becomes resistance. But truth handled gently becomes healing. Tonight, we are choosing gentle truth. Before we move forward tonight, I want to sit in something for just a moment, because many of you listening right now, whether you will admit it out loud or not, have felt the weight of carrying something you could not easily explain. Maybe it wasn't about identity. Maybe it wasn't about orientation. Maybe it was about family pressure, cultural expectations, religious fear, childhood confusion, or simply not having the language for what your body and emotions were experiencing. Human beings are not born with emotional instruction manuals. We are born into environments, and environments shape behavior long before we understand what is happening inside of us. Some of you learned very early, this is safe to say. This is not safe to say. This part of me is acceptable. This part of me must stay hidden. And once the nervous system learns what feels dangerous, it does not easily forget. So tonight, my beautiful listeners, we are not just talking about secrets. We are talking about survival patterns, because many behaviors that look confusing on the outside were once protection strategies on the inside. Dear Lady Divine, I didn't wake up one morning and choose this path, this lifestyle. My story began before I had language for it. I was young. Too young to understand what was happening around me and to me, too young to interpret touch, too young to interpret attention, too young to interpret secrecy, too young to interpret discomfort. I only knew something felt off, but I also knew, without anyone saying it directly, that I was not supposed to talk about it. So I learned silence before I learned truth. Adults didn't ask questions. Teachers didn't notice the change. Family members said I was just quiet. No one asked why I became withdrawn. No one asked why I avoided certain places. No one asked why my personality shifted. So I adapted, because children always adapt. Silence became my protection. Silence became my normal. Silence became my survival strategy. And the longer I carried it, the heavier it became. I grew up carrying confusion I never named. I don't hate myself, but I don't fully understand myself either. I am not broken, but I am afraid of being misunderstood. Anonymous. My love, when a child learns silence instead of safety, that silence becomes their survival skill, and survival skills, when carried too long into adulthood, can quietly become emotional prisons. Children are not supposed to manage secrets alone. Children are not supposed to process confusion without guidance. Children are not supposed to carry adult-sized burdens in child-sized nervous systems. But when adults fail to create safe spaces, children create hiding spaces, and hiding grows roots. Let me say something very clearly tonight. Confusion is not corruption. Trauma is not identity. Survival is not shame. And what was not protected then can still be healed now. Let me gently educate something here that many communities still misunderstand. When a child experiences confusion, secrecy, or inappropriate exposure too early, the body often stores the experience long before the mind has words for it. This is not weakness. This is neurobiology. The developing brain is highly sensitive to touch, attention, approval, fear, and emotional safety signals. When something happens that the child cannot process safely, the nervous system adapts in survival mode. Sometimes that adaptation looks like withdrawal, hyper-awareness, people-pleasing, emotional shutdown, or identity confusion later in life. And here is where compassion must enter the room. Because many adults are still trying to make sense of experiences their younger selves never had support to process. Healing requires language. Healing requires safety. Healing requires spaces where people can say, I don't fully understand my story yet, but I am trying. And trying is where recovery begins. Dear Lady Divine, I live what people would call a successful life. I hold a respected position. I wear responsibility like a uniform. People greet me with admiration. People trust my leadership. People assume they know me. I have a partner people believe I love in the expected way. I attend events. I smile in photos. I show up to family functions. I perform the version of myself that keeps everyone comfortable. But there is another truth, one I have never spoken out loud publicly, not because I enjoy deception, but because I understand consequences. I fear losing my career. I fear losing family support. I fear social rejection. I fear becoming the topic of conversation instead of a human being. I fear physical danger. I fear becoming a headline instead of a person. So I learned to split myself in two. One version for the world, one version in private, but living divided has a cost. You become emotionally exhausted. You monitor every word. You rehearse every sentence. You edit every gesture. You filter every reaction. You study people's reactions before you even finish speaking. You never fully relax. You never fully exhale. And over time, secrecy begins to distort your choices. Living between two worlds. Living divided is emotional labor. Heavy emotional labor. When someone must constantly monitor themselves, their nervous system never fully rests. And when honesty feels dangerous, people do not automatically become truthful. They become invisible. But invisibility is not safety. It is isolation. Communities must understand this clearly. When people cannot speak safely, they do not disappear. They adapt. They compartmentalize. They perform. They suffer quietly. And quiet suffering rarely stays contained, not because someone is evil, but because unsupported pressure always looks for release. Let's talk honestly about performance for a moment, because performance culture runs deep in many of our communities. From a very young age, many people are taught, perform strength, perform success, perform masculinity, perform perfection. Perform. Everything is fine, but performance is exhausting. Living a double life is not just emotional, it is physiological. When someone is constantly scanning their environment to stay safe, the body remains in a low-level stress response. Heart rate slightly elevated, muscles slightly tense, mind constantly calculating risk. Over time, this creates what professionals call chronic nervous system activation. And what does chronic activation produce? Fatigue, irritability, poor decision-making, emotional shutdown, secret coping behaviors, not because someone is morally weak, but because the human nervous system was never designed to live under constant identity surveillance. So, when we talk about honesty tonight, we must also talk about safety, because people tell the truth when the cost of truth is lower than the cost of hiding. And in many environments, that equation is still upside down. Dear Lady Divine, I am writing tonight as a wife who is still trying to make sense of what I discovered. For a long time, I believed my marriage was built on honesty, not perfection. I am not naive, but honesty. Then one evening, almost by accident, everything shifted. I found messages. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. Then I found hidden accounts. Then more conversations. Then patterns that did not match the life we had been presenting to the world or to each other. My first reaction was anger. Not quite anger. The kind that makes your hands shake. The kind that makes your chest feel tight. The kind that makes you question every memory you thought was solid. My second reaction was heartbreak, because beneath the anger was grief. Grief for the version of my marriage I thought I was living. Grief for the years I believed we were moving in the same emotional direction. Grief for the trust that now felt fragile. And then came my third reaction, confusion, not because of identity. I want to be very clear about that. My confusion was never about orientation. My confusion was about honesty, because I kept asking myself one question over and over again. Why didn't you trust me with the truth? I would have chosen painful honesty over comfortable deception. I would have chosen a hard conversation over years of false security. What hurts is not who someone is. What hurts is building a life on information that turns out to be incomplete. Women deserve informed choice. Partners deserve honesty. Marriage deserves transparency. Even when the truth is uncomfortable, I am not writing to attack anyone. I am not writing to shame anyone. I am writing because silence inside relationships creates damage that spreads far beyond the original secret. Truth matters, even when it is difficult. A wife who found out. Thank you for your courage in sharing that, and let me say this slowly because it deserves to land with care. Betrayal pain is real, not imagined, not exaggerated, not something people should simply get over. When trust is disrupted inside an intimate relationship, the nervous system does not experience it as a small inconvenience. It experiences it as emotional destabilization, because long-term partnership is built on one central expectation: shared reality. When one partner discovers that important parts of the relationship were happening outside that shared reality, the body often responds with shock first, then grief, then anger, then deep questioning, and every one of those responses is human. Now, let us hold something important with both hands tonight. This conversation is not about excusing deception, and it is also not about turning complex human struggles into simple villain stories. It is about understanding how silence, especially prolonged silence, creates ripple effects that touch multiple lives. You said something very powerful in your letter. You said, I would have chosen painful honesty over comfortable deception. That sentence right there is where prevention lives, because when honesty feels survivable inside relationships, more people choose it earlier. But when honesty feels like it will immediately lead to total rejection, public humiliation, family collapse, or personal danger, some people delay truth-telling far longer than they should. That delay does not erase the impact on the partner. Your pain is valid. Your grief is understandable. Your desire for informed choice is reasonable and healthy. Partners do deserve honesty, especially when decisions about intimacy, health, and long-term life planning are involved. At the same time, if we are going to reduce how often situations like yours occur, communities must create environments where difficult truths can be spoken earlier and more safely, because secrets rarely stay contained. They expand under pressure, and when they finally surface, they often do so with maximum emotional impact. You also said something else that deserves careful attention. You said your hurt was not about identity, it was about dishonesty. That distinction matters, because it allows us to hold two truths at the same time. Deception inside committed relationships causes real harm, and fear-driven secrecy often grows in environments where honesty feels dangerous. Both can exist simultaneously. Both require attention. Both require more mature conversations in our communities. To every listener hearing this tonight, especially those in long-term partnerships, let me offer this gentle but firm guidance. If there is a difficult truth living in your silence, waiting does not make the conversation easier. Time does not neutralize hidden reality. In most cases, it compounds the impact when discovery eventually happens. Hard conversations held early are almost always less destructive than revelations discovered late. And to the writer of this letter, your voice tonight represents many partners who have sat quietly with similar discoveries, unsure where to place their emotions. Your call for transparency is not unreasonable. Your call for informed choice is not extreme. Your call for honesty is not an attack. It is a request for relational dignity. And that is something healthy partnerships must always protect. Soft pause. Because, my beautiful listeners, love is not only about connection, it is also about clarity. And clarity is an act of care. Before we move forward tonight, I want us to sit gently with something that many communities still struggle to talk about openly, because sometimes the roots of adult confusion do not begin in adulthood. Sometimes they begin in places that were supposed to feel sacred, supposed to feel protected, supposed to feel safe. And when harm enters spaces that were meant to provide spiritual covering, the emotional impact can follow someone for years, sometimes decades. Tonight's next letter carries that kind of weight. Let us listen carefully. Dear Lady Divine, I've been listening quietly to the show tonight, and for the first time, I feel like I might have the courage to speak. My story didn't start in the streets. It didn't start in clubs. It didn't start in rebellion. My story started in church. I was raised in the church from the time I was small. Sunday mornings, Bible study, youth choir, vacation Bible school. Church was not just something we attended. It was our whole world. It was the place my mother said I was covered, the place my grandmother said angels watched over me, the place I was taught that nothing evil could reach me if I stayed close to God. And for many years, I believed that, with my whole heart, there was a man in leadership, highly respected, deeply trusted, the kind of man people pointed to as an example of spiritual discipline. He noticed me early. He praised me, encouraged me, told me I was mature for my age, told me God had a special calling on my life. And when you are a young boy, hungry for guidance, hungry for affirmation, those words don't just land lightly, they root deeply. What began as mentorship slowly became something else. Private talks after service, special attention, moments that felt important, but also confusing. At first, I didn't have language for what was happening. I only knew I felt uncomfortable sometimes, but I also knew he told me not to speak about our conversations. He said people would misunderstand. He said this was spiritual. He said this was part of my growth. He said this was our secret. And I had been raised to respect authority, to never question leadership, to obey those placed over me. So I stayed quiet. By the time I realized something inside me felt wrong, I was already emotionally tangled in the situation. And when I tried to pull back, he made me feel responsible for protecting him, responsible for protecting the ministry, responsible for keeping the peace. So I carried it, silently. I grew up, but something in me had shifted. Something had been introduced into my emotional world that I did not fully understand how to process. Confusion mixed with shame, affection mixed with violation, attachment mixed with secrecy, and I never told anyone. Years passed. I became a man still carrying questions that started when I was a boy. I made choices later in life, some careless, some reckless, some that, looking back now, were probably rooted in wounds I never addressed. Today, I am writing this from a hospital bed. I am HIV positive. My health is declining. And in these quiet moments, I find myself asking a question that will probably never have a clear answer. If that early experience in church had never happened, would my life have unfolded differently? Would I have understood my boundaries better? Would I have protected myself better? Would I be lying here right now? I don't know. What I do know is this: there is no one sitting beside my bed, because where I come from, this diagnosis still carries heavy judgment. People whisper, but they do not visit. They speculate, but they do not sit and hold your hand. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if God still sees me. The boy from the church. My love. First, let us slow this moment down, because this letter carries multiple layers of pain: spiritual pain, emotional pain, medical reality, and social isolation. Let me begin by grounding something clearly and responsibly. HIV is a medical condition. It is not a spiritual verdict. It is not divine punishment. It is not proof of someone's worth. It is a virus that enters the body through exposure, and modern medicine has made tremendous progress in treatment and management. Now, let us talk about the deeper wound beneath this letter. When authority, especially spiritual authority, is misused with a young person, it does more than break trust. It can distort a child's understanding of boundaries, safety, affection, power, and self-worth, because children naturally assume that trusted adults are guiding them correctly. They are wired to trust. They are wired to follow. They are wired to seek approval. So when harm is introduced under the covering of mentorship, the nervous system becomes confused, not because the child is weak, but because the situation itself is contradictory. Praise mixed with discomfort, affection mixed with secrecy, authority mixed with pressure. These experiences can leave emotional fingerprints that last far into adulthood. Now, and this is important for balance, not every survivor of early trauma will follow the same life path. But unprocessed trauma can influence later decision-making. It can affect risk assessment. It can affect attachment patterns. It can affect how someone seeks comfort or connection under stress. And that deserves compassion, not simplistic judgment.
Lady Divine, thank you for allowing this conversation. I am calling tonight as someone who has served in church leadership for over 20 years, and I need to speak plainly. For too long, some institutions have handled allegations of misconduct quietly, instead of transparently. We prayed over situations that required investigation. We encouraged silence where accountability was needed. And sometimes, we were more concerned about protecting the reputation of the institution than protecting the well-being of the individual. That must change, because when harm happens in trusted environments and is not properly addressed, the ripple effects can follow someone for decades. This is not about attacking faith. This is about strengthening integrity. If communities of faith want to remain places of refuge, then we must be willing to implement clear reporting pathways, background screening, independent review processes, trauma-informed support referrals. And we must be brave enough to say publicly, if someone was harmed here, we want truth and healing more than we want silence.
Thank you for that perspective. Accountability does not weaken faith communities. It strengthens trust within them because transparency builds safety, and safety encourages honesty, and honesty, handled responsibly, prevents long-term damage. Tonight's conversation is not about assigning blame across entire institutions. It is about recognizing patterns that communities everywhere must remain vigilant about, because protecting the vulnerable must always remain the highest priority. And to the writer of that letter, lying in that hospital bed, I want to say something directly to you. Your story did not end the moment your diagnosis began. Medical care today offers pathways for management and support, and emotional healing can still happen in the presence of compassion and proper care. No human being should have to face serious illness in complete isolation. Communities grow stronger when compassion becomes visible, when presence becomes normal, when support replaces whispering. Because, my beautiful listeners, sometimes the deepest wounds are not only physical, sometimes they are the quiet moments when someone looks around a hospital room and realizes the chair beside the bed is empty. And that is something we still have the power to change for someone else. Soft pause.
Lady Divine, I almost didn't call tonight, because calling means being heard, and being heard can feel dangerous. Silence feels safer than visibility, even when silence is hurting you. I want people to understand something clearly tonight. Fear shapes behavior. When boys grow up hearing, "Don't say that," "Don't act like that," "Don't be that," "Hide that," they learn something very quickly. They learn performance. They learn to perform normal, perform strength, perform masculinity, perform acceptance. But performance is not identity. Performance is armor, and armor is heavy to wear every single day. Not every hidden man is a predator. Not every hidden man is reckless. Many are terrified of losing everything overnight. We need safe counseling spaces. We need confidential health access. We need mental health support without moral judgment. Help works better than hostility. Support works better than shame. Understanding works better than attack. I'm not asking for approval. I'm asking for safety.
Thank you for your honesty. Fear does not equal evil, but unmanaged fear can lead to unmanaged behavior. Support systems reduce risk. Isolation increases it. Connection regulates behavior. Rejection destabilizes it. No one makes their best decisions from a place of terror.
Lady Divine, I'm speaking tonight as a mother. My concern is not identity. My concern is education. Because silence keeps communities uninformed, and uninformed communities are vulnerable communities. We teach children math. We teach children reading. We teach children road safety. But we avoid emotional safety, body safety, relationship honesty, trauma awareness. Then we are shocked when confusion grows in the dark. Cruelty doesn't protect children. Information does.
I want to speak carefully here, but clearly. Many communities say they want honesty. Many families say they value truth. Many institutions say, just be real with us. But the nervous system watches behavior, not slogans. If someone has seen people mocked, people isolated, people exposed, people abandoned, people harmed after telling difficult truths, then fear is not imaginary. It is learned. Trust is built slowly, but it can be rebuilt. Communities that truly want more honesty must create more emotional safety, because pressure without safety does not produce truth. It produces better hiding, and many people have become very skilled at hiding. Both voices matter. Truth without compassion becomes violence. Compassion without truth becomes denial. Balanced truth saves lives. Let me speak slowly now. Being gay is not a crime. Being confused is not a crime. Being afraid is not a crime. Fear is human. Confusion is human. Identity development is human. And HIV is not a moral judgment. It is a medical condition. And medical conditions require testing, treatment, support, not condemnation. When communities respond with violence, mockery, or exposure, they do not stop behavior. They drive it underground. And secrecy is where prevention fails. Education prevents transmission. Testing prevents spread. Counseling prevents crisis. Compassion prevents tragedy. We must build cultures where honesty is survivable. Because if honesty feels deadly, people will choose silence every time. And silence is expensive. It costs relationships. It costs health. It costs trust. It costs families. It costs lives. This is not softness. This is strategy. Compassion is prevention strategy. Education is prevention strategy. Safety is prevention strategy. Now, let us talk about solutions, because awareness without direction can leave people feeling heavy but not helped. If someone listening tonight recognizes pieces of themselves in these stories, here are gentle first steps that research consistently supports. First, regulated breathing. Slow, controlled breathing signals the nervous system that immediate danger is not present. Second, professional counseling, not gossip circles, not social media debates. Qualified, confidential support. Third, medical testing when appropriate, because early knowledge protects long-term health. Fourth, trusted conversations, not with everyone, but with someone emotionally safe. Healing rarely happens in isolation. And finally, self-compassion, because shame freezes growth, but compassion creates movement.
Lady Divine, thank you for creating space for real education tonight. I'm calling as a healthcare educator because I hear a lot of confusion in communities about two very important prevention tools, PEP and PrEP. Many people hear the words, but don't fully understand what they mean, when to use them, or how effective they are when used correctly. So let me break this down clearly. What is PrEP? PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. Keyword, pre-exposure. This is medication taken before potential exposure to HIV. It is designed for people who are HIV negative and want to significantly reduce their risk of acquiring HIV. When taken consistently as prescribed, PrEP is highly effective. Studies show it can reduce sexual transmission risk by about 99%. But, and this part matters, PrEP only works at its highest protection level when it is taken consistently, it is taken correctly, and medical follow-up is maintained. It is not a one-time pill. It is a prevention strategy that requires commitment. What is PEP? Now let's talk about PEP. PEP stands for post-exposure prophylaxis. Keyword, post-exposure. This is emergency medication taken after a possible exposure to HIV. Important facts. It must be started within 72 hours of exposure. The sooner it is started, the better. It is taken for 28 days. It is not meant for routine use. Think of PEP as an emergency intervention, not a long-term prevention plan. Common confusion. Undetectable. Now, Lady Divine, you mentioned something important that many people misunderstand. You asked about individuals who are HIV positive on treatment and undetectable. Let me explain carefully. When someone living with HIV takes antiretroviral therapy consistently and correctly, their viral load can become undetectable in blood tests. Medical research has shown something very powerful: undetectable, not untransmittable, UU. This means when a person maintains a truly undetectable viral load through consistent treatment, they do not sexually transmit HIV to partners. However, and this is where responsible education matters, UU only holds true when medication is taken consistently, medical monitoring continues, viral suppression is maintained if someone stops taking medication or takes it inconsistently or falls out of care, their viral load can rise again. And once the virus is no longer suppressed, transmission risk returns. So the key issue is not that undetectable people are secretly transmitting. The key issue is medication adherence and ongoing medical care. Pros and considerations. Benefits of PrEP. Highly effective when taken correctly. Gives individuals proactive control over prevention. Well-studied and widely recommended considerations. Requires daily or prescribed dosing. Requires regular HIV testing, requires medical follow-up, does not protect against other STIs. Benefits of PEP. Emergency protection after potential exposure. Time-sensitive intervention. Can prevent infection if started quickly. Considerations. Must begin within 72 hours. Must complete full 28-day course. Not designed for repeated routine use. can have temporary side effects. Final clarity. Point. The most important takeaway for listeners tonight is this. Modern HIV prevention and treatment tools are powerful, but they work best when people are informed, consistent, medically supported, and free from stigma that keeps them from care. Education protects. Silence increases risk. Thank you for allowing me to share this tonight.
Thank you for breaking that down so clearly, because information, accurate information, is one of the strongest prevention tools we have. And to my listeners tonight, let me gently underline the most important message. Medical tools work best when people feel safe enough to use them properly. Stigma keeps people away from testing. Stigma keeps people away from treatment. Stigma keeps people away from prevention. And prevention is always stronger than fear. Divine Dare, tonight's Divine Dare. Have one real conversation this week, just one, without accusation, without sarcasm, without moral superiority. Ask questions instead of assuming answers. Listen instead of preparing rebuttals. Create safety before demanding truth, because truth grows where safety exists. Quote of the night: silence does not protect communities. Understanding does. If tonight's episode stirred something in you, do not sit alone with it. Reach out, seek counseling, encourage testing, encourage education. Knowledge is not shameful. Prevention is not offensive. Compassion is not weakness. Before we close tonight, I want to speak directly to 3 people listening. To the person who is confused, you are not alone in that feeling. Confusion is often the first step toward clarity. To the person who feels betrayed, your pain is valid. Honesty and transparency matter deeply in committed relationships. And to the person who is silently afraid, fear thrives in isolation. But fear begins to lose power when safe support enters the picture. This conversation tonight was never about choosing sides. It was about reducing harm, protecting families, protecting health, protecting dignity, and most importantly, preventing silence from doing quiet damage for another generation. Soft pause, because my beautiful listeners, what we whisper in the dark often shapes what happens in the light. Tonight, we chose listening over shouting, understanding over accusation, compassion over cruelty, because truth, handled gently, becomes a bridge, not a weapon. This has been Dear Lady Divine, where we sip slowly and speak honestly. Until next time, sip slowly, listen deeply, and choose compassion. Theme music fades out slowly.